Anytime now. What's up, horror fans? Pete here from the Lassercast, and the 4th of July weekend is here. 4th of July is coming up next week, and boy, don't you just want to go on a road trip with your in-laws and just go drive through the desert? That sounds like a lot of fun, right?
Hook the trailer to the station wagon and just let it go,
Yes. Danny, would you prefer to either go on a road trip with the extended family or get attacked by mutants and hillbillies and stuff in the middle of the desert?
So I don't know if I've ever gone on a road trip with the extended family, but I have gone on vacation with my extended family.
Okay.
So it's definitely the cannibals.
There you go. Yes.
No, I really enjoyed watching this again, and full disclosure, and I mentioned this to Pete right before, I watched both the original Wes Craven 1977 Hills Have Eyes and immediately rewatched the 2006 Alexander Aja remake. And as somebody who, I know you live in Texas, so I'm not claiming to have carte blanche on the West, but I spent a week in Hollywood. I've been to Vegas twice. And I a few months ago was in Scottsdale, Arizona, and Athena and I did like a long drive to the Grand Canyon and to Sedona. So I was driving through a lot of this territory, or at least what feels like this territory, like long desert drives. And I did get some flashbacks. Didn't see any cannibals when I was in Arizona during spring break. We did do like a 6-hour round trip drive to Tombstone, Arizona, which was a ton of fun.
That's
and
cool.
Like the craters and the beautiful mountains in the background, like that. I love it out there. Now, would I like to be, would I like to have my car die in the middle with, 50 years, 30 years before the cell phone? No. So
yeah, it's when you think about that setting, it's perfect for this kind of movie because it's just so bleak and oppressive. And we're talking, if you guys haven't guessed by now, we're talking about the 1977 The Hills Have Eyes. It's the cult movie. It's the second Wes Craven movie. It's his follow-up to The Last House on the Left. And then Danny mentioned this before, but I am a big fan of the remake, the Alexander Aja remake. So we're going to talk about both today. We're finishing out our Wes Craven month. And both films are just really fucking brutal and upsetting. And I think that this desert setting that you're talking about is like just the perfect setting for that. It's like there's nothing, there's no escape from it. It's just like dry. There's no water in either of these movies. There's barely any trees at all. It's just rocks and fucking dirt and death.
yeah. And cannibals, and then I guess we can go with cannibal mutants in the remake.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about what made this movie happen in the first place, the 1977 Hills Have Eyes. So Wes Craven actually didn't want to make a horror movie as his follow-up to The Last House on the Left, but basically he ultimately ended up making this for financial reasons. Like he was trying to get some other projects going, but just they weren't taken off. And so he based this on a real life story of a Scottish cannibal named Sawney Bean. Have you ever heard of him?
The Sawney Bean family. Apparently they were like a cannibal family in, I believe, the 16th century in Scotland. And I was doing a little research that it literally took like the King of England to go, or like the King of Scotland, King James, the whatever. I always get murky on English history. But one of the kings actually sent like an expedition to hunt Sawney Bean down and have him executed.
Wow.
Yeah, it's one of those like old stories that as long as I've known about this movie, I've always heard, it's kind of like it feels very similar in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, it feels very similar to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh yeah.
And I say that in part because Wes Craven basically was, this is kind of his, unspoken remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He was a huge fan of that movie and Toby Hooper.
Right.
But in like, whenever you hear about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, everybody always goes, "Oh, it's the Ed Gein story." And if you know anything about Ed Gein, it really isn't. Ed Gein never chainsawed people. Yes, there's like, the whole idea of like using human bones and human flesh in his like arts and crafts. But that's pretty much as far as it goes. But there's always that legend of like, oh, Psycho was based on Ed Gein, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre was based on Ed Gein. And then you'd look up the Hills Have Eyes, and the first thing you'd always see is the Sonny Bean story.
Yeah.
And like, I can't imagine, like, so like when I heard that, being probably 14 or 15 when I first encountered this movie, I'm thinking Sonny Bean is like this person from the early 1900s, and then I look and he's like from the 1500s in Scotland, and I'm like, this feels like something Wes Craven must have heard of one day and been like, cannibals, picking people off. Let's do that.
Right. Oh yeah. Like extremely loosely based on, right? Just that little nugget that gets your imagination rolling. And it's a terrifying thing. Like, you are living in Brooklyn right now, and I lived in New York for the first 26 years of my life. And when we go on trips, it just feels different because you're not in the city. You're not around, police stations and hospitals and just constant people around to kind of take note and get help if need be. When you get to these desolate areas, whether it's a desert or like a wooded area, you're always worried about these kind of freaks just hiding out there that are going to jump you. It is like a pretty bad nightmare for guys like us, it's sort of unreasonable because for the most part you don't have freaks like this, but this is like the worst case scenario in this movie. They we have this family, and what I found really interesting was that I've seen the remake multiple times, and I love the remake. And when I watched this was the first time I ever watched it on Tubi. Thank God for Tubi. And it was like surprising. Like the two stories are very, very similar.
So I noticed, especially this is the first time I ever did like a literal one movie ended, started the next movie.
Yeah.
So I always make this a thing about Rob Zombie's Halloween, where I really give Rob Zombie credit. Yeah. Is the first half of his Halloween remake is completely different. It's a completely different take on Michael Myers. And I know I don't want to get into it. People might, hate his vision of Michael Myers, and that's perfectly fine. But I like when I go into a remake and it's something different. I don't want to watch Gus Van Sant's Psycho. Okay. Yeah. I don't want to watch that. And I don't want to watch cheap cash grab sequels or remakes. What always bothered me about Rob Zombie's Halloween was that when Michael escapes from the institution, it basically becomes a complete remake of the original film.
Right.
This movie does the complete opposite of that. Alexander Aja's 2006 remake, the first 40 minutes are like beat for beat. Like,
yep.
Like to the point where they even like reuse almost entire, like, if you've seen this movie, you know what I'm going to say. The biting off the head of the bird and drinking the blood is done like beat by beat. The way the family is attacked, the way that the dad and the brother-in-law or the son-in-law go in opposite directions and they leave everybody behind, and it's even like the opening scene with the gas station attendant. These scenes are the first 40 plus minutes, to the point where watching them back to back with the 2006 movie, I was like, oh man, I don't remember it being this on the nose. Now, granted, it was almost 30 years later, 1977 to 2006. But then it's the second half of these movies that the Alexander Aja movie goes in a very, not very different, but uniquely different direction of like the mines and the cannibal and the mutants and the nuclear radiation and everything about that. And so I think it does separate itself from the Craven's film. And I think that's a great way to do it, where it's like you reestablish what the original film is doing, you set that same story in motion, and then you can kind of take it and tweak it as you go along to create a new film. I mean, the original movie for me, the thing that sticks out the most for me is really the movie box itself, like the just Michael Berryman. His face was like used to market this movie.
Oh yes, yes, yes.
And like he's on the original poster, he's on the original VHS box. And I remember seeing this in the video store when I was younger and not understanding how they did his makeup before I realized later on in life, obviously, that it wasn't makeup. He was born with a very specific, I didn't write it down. I'm sure you could look it up real fast, but he was born with a very specific condition that, you know, I think like he had to have like multiple surgeries when he was young, and his head is, you know, I don't mean to be, I'm not saying this to be mean or anything, but he's slightly misshapen, and he looks like he was born to be a horror movie character. And he's, to his credit, he's basically taken this movie and used it to launch a career. He's still active. He's still alive. He's still active in horror films 50 years later almost.
Yeah.
And he's one of the most recognizable genre actors that we have. He goes to horror conventions all the time. I mean, so kudos to him for making such a great career of this. But like, I remember being genuinely unsettled by his appearance as a kid because he was so front and center in the marketing.
Oh, yes, yes. Did you ever meet him at a convention?
I might have met him in passing. I don't know if I ever like stopped to meet him, but from everything I've ever heard, he's like a genuinely awesome guy. And like, I know people who have either met him or worked with him who have nothing but nice things to say about him.
Yeah, yeah. He kind of reminds me of who's the one that plays the mummy in the Universal? Is that Lon Chaney? Or is that
the original mummy?
The original mummy.
Boris Karloff.
Boris Karloff. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Boris Karloff in the face, but obviously, yeah, he does look different. It said when I looked him up that he had 26 different birth defects. So, like, you know, he's just sort of different looking based on his own genetics and like the way he was born, right? And they found him, and he's just this perfect character for this movie. They focus a lot on him in this movie too, and he absolutely stands out among the other characters. I think like what I wanted to do first was kind of talk about how different the family is, and then I wanted to talk about how different the cannibals are in both movies, because in the movie, the original, and then in the remake, the families are pretty much the same for the most part, with like slight variations.
They're the exact same makeup too. They don't, you know, this was 2006. This wasn't like we're going to gender or race swap anybody.
Right.
This is like, you know, old fashioned dad, old fashioned mom, couple of daughters, one brother-in-law, 2 younger kids, and a pair of beautiful German shepherds.
Right. Yeah, and the baby, right? And
the baby. I forgot the baby's probably the most crucial character.
Yeah. I would say that really the only main distinction between the two families, because even the way that they are attacked, the way that they die, their reactions to things are all the same in both movies, right? I'd say the only real distinction is that the son-in-law, right? What do you call it?
Doug.
Martin Spear, right? Doug Wood, right? He's like a bit more like liberal. They do more of like the liberal versus conservative in the remake. He seems like not as like in the remake, they make it like liberals are soft or like they don't know reality or how
he's a Democrat. He doesn't use guns.
Right. Exactly. And so in this movie, there's not really that kind of that line drawn between the two. He's a little bit more like, I'd say, masculine. In the remake, Doug is like, he becomes more masculine after the horror happens, you know? But otherwise,
I agree. I think they make a point of that in the remake to show, like, really show his transformation from like I don't want to touch a gun to, he goes with the dog and the baseball bat, and by the end he's like a fucking blood-soaked like action hero.
One of my favorite scenes in any movie, but definitely in a horror movie, is when he goes to take out one of the mutants in the remake, and he has the axe, and he like flips the axe around, and that's one of my favorite scenes ever.
That's a great framing moment of the camera in that movie. I was gonna say that comes right after Aaron Stanford's battle with Pluto, which is one of my favorite like horror movie fight scenes.
Yeah.
The remake gets to do, I think, a lot more stuff like that. I mean, it obviously had a much bigger budget. This was Craven's second movie. What I will say is, I think that the cannibals themselves are a lot more vile and threatening in the original.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Especially the character of Papa Jupiter, who we kind of find out in this like weird exposition dump at the beginning by the guy, the gas station attendant.
Oh yeah, Fred.
Yeah, that he was that's like Fred's son, and he knew that he was evil. He killed his mother, and so he hit him in the face with an axe or something, a crowbar. And you get to see that makeup later, and it looks fantastic. On the actor James Whitworth, who plays Papa Jupiter.
Right.
And like he basically took him out into the desert to like let him die. And of course, he doesn't die, and he ends up forming like an inbred family of like cannibal savages who like hunt down and pull people off the road, and and you get the Lance Gordon plays the character of Mars, who in the remake is the character's name is Lizard, played by Robert Joy. They are basically the same character. They're like one of like the main villains, real main villains. But yeah, James Whitworth as Papa Jupiter is a lot more present and evil and really nasty in the original film. Yeah. They cast Billy Drago, a really good actor, late great actor, who's been in a bunch of horror movies, and he like barely appears in the remake. Like he's in the very beginning when he's in the backseat of the car and he captures the dad. And then he has the one scene at the end where he really chases the kids. I feel like a lot of the scenes involving him might have been like cut.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe there's like an unrated edition that I haven't seen where there's more of him. Because it feels weird to have like a Papa Jupiter character be like a side character.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I have seen the remake multiple times, and I really like it. I can remember the scenes pretty well. But then when you go back and you watch the original, you're like, oh, okay, it's just like it. But then there's these distinct differences, and it gets exciting because you're like, oh, I didn't know about this guy as much. And so, yeah, they go into his backstory. They explain how the family came to be. And in the remake, it's like they're sort of the product of nuclear testing, and that's why they're all deformed. In the remake, they're more like monstrous looking, and they look like, they're like mutant monsters. Whereas in the original, they're sort of like inbred, kind of like hippie-ish hillbilly freaks.
Yeah.
And it's funny because like, when you look at it in 2023, you're looking back at this thing, it's in 1977, you look at like Mama and stuff, and you're like, oh, they're kind of silly looking with their costumes, right?
I'm thinking like the way you just described that, I'm thinking of like how they would fit on the board in Cabin in the Woods.
Okay.
Like inbred hippie cannibal family versus like mutated nuclear cannibal family.
Right. And it's funny because they're both very scary, both versions. In the remake, it's much more that you don't see them, you kind of hear their voices more. Like they don't talk as much, so there's more like mystery, and they're more menacing and scary. You're like, what am I looking at? What's going on here? There's a lot of that in the remake. In the original, they're more like in your face, and you kind of see their family dynamic better. You see it in both movies, but in the original, you see it more.
Yeah.
And one of the scenes in the remake, the one I saw first, was when they burn the dad, Big Bob. They burn him, right? And then he's like kind of crucified, and they burn him. And I remember seeing that in theater and be like, "Oh my god, this is fucking starting up right now." In the original, they show Big Bob like actually getting crucified, and it's really fucked up. They put something in his mouth, and then they actually put stakes in his hands or whatever. There's also a scene where where Papa Jupiter talks to his dead body, and that's really fucked up too, because he basically describes what he's going to do to his family, and like the language that he uses is really disturbing, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, those first couple of Craven movies are real visceral experiences. They are not pleasant watches.
No,
like
no.
I don't enjoy the 1977 Hills Have Eyes. I don't like it's not a movie I feel is supposed to be enjoyed. Whereas,
no,
as bizarre as this might sound, I think you can, if you're a horror fan and you're a gore hound, you can enjoy the 2006 movie because of its like splatter and gore and monster creature effects by K&B, like the way that Michael Bailey Smith, the actor who plays Pluto, the way he looks and the way he acts like the makeup is done, and he acts like a combination of Gunnar Hansen's Leatherface from 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Sloth from the Goonies. He kind of looks like this, like amalgamation. What if Sloth and Leatherface became one? But then there's also these like the guy in the wheelchair with the brain hanging off the back of his head.
Yeah.
We went into the mines.
Yeah. Kill the baby. Yeah.
You don't get that. You don't get there. You don't get these like. There's the moment where Doug, Aaron Stanford's character, wakes up in like the refrigerator of body parts, and the crazy editing of that scene and the music going on. You don't get that in Craven's movie. Craven's movie is like, here's a bunch of awful shit that we're going to make you watch.
Right.
And and it's just brutal. It doesn't. I mean, there's even the scene where the scene that really like fucked me up a little bit. Yeah. I remember the first time I saw it, where they like the two kids like prop up their mother's corpse.
Yep.
To like try to like bait Papa Jupiter into a trap. And I'm like, oh my God, can you imagine the like broken down mentality you must have if that's what you are doing?
Right. So disturbing. And that does stick with me. There are things in this original that stick with me, even though I kind of knew, okay, this is this scene. It's like the exact same thing. It still bothered me. Like Dee Wallace in this, for example, right? She gets killed pretty much the same way the mother or the daughter who has a baby gets killed in the second one, right? But in this one, it felt worse. Like the way the husband reacts, the way Doug reacts when he finds her body, that just really bothered me. Like he's just like really sad, and he holds her close, and he's like, "Don't go," and she's clearly dead already. Like it really stuck with me. So I mean, like, there's something to be said. Like the remake is so like well shot, and the music is this sort of like dubstep kind of techno-y kind of like factory kind of sound. But the original is just this very like raw, emotional, fucking upsetting movie.
I think kind of playing off what you said, and to take it back to Texas Chainsaw, the reason that I love the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's one of my all-time favorite movies. Top 5 horror movies that I've ever seen. Because there's always this feeling, and I've rewatched the original Texas Chainsaw 25 to 50 times. There is never a moment I'm watching that movie where I feel like I am watching a movie. It always feels like I'm watching something I shouldn't be watching.
Yeah.
There's always pardon the word, but there's always a snuff mentality to that movie.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And Craven really gets that in his Hills Have Eyes. And I think it's also the subtlety of the score, the lack of the crazy like edits and the loud music in the background. You feel like you're looking at characters that aren't really characters, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas the 2006 movie is a movie. Like, you know, the blood is bright red. The music is pumping. The camera does these wild zoom ins and zoom outs. When like Big Bob is on fire, the camera does this like crazy zoom in on that. And then at the very end, when you think, oh, good, they survived, the camera does this crazy pan out into like, oh, somebody's still watching them. There's nothing like that in Craven's movie. It's just bare bones, gritty, raw, visceral, like blood and guts filmmaking. And and anytime a horror movie makes you feel genuinely uncomfortable for watching something, I feel like it sticks with you.
Oh yes. Very, very well put. Very well put. I think that there's scenes in this movie where I'm like, how the fuck did they even film that? Because there's a couple of parts where they're holding the baby, and I'm like, okay, that's a baby doll, right? That's got to be a baby doll because of the way they're moving. But then you look a little closer, and like, holy shit, that is a real baby that they're holding in this scene. Like when, what do you call it? Which one is John Barry?
Michael Berryman?
Pluto, right?
Yeah.
So Pluto is just carrying the baby, and I'm like, okay, he's clearly holding a doll, but then it's like, no, that's a real baby. And there's one part in the camper, which when you're filming inside of a camper, that's such a small space to begin with, right? And they're like wrestling, and the guy's trying to rape the girl, and he does, and you know they're like fighting, and then they're shooting and shit, and there's a baby just on the floor screaming. It's like, how the fuck did you film this? Who are these kids' parents, you know, right in the real world that would just let this happen? And you're just kind of like, oh, I feel bad for watching this.
Yeah.
But the thing is, there are movies where I feel bad for watching them. And I'm like, well, why did they make this? Just to make me feel bad? But the remake of Hills Have Eyes and this version both have like satisfying revenge from the heroes. Like the victims get their revenge, right? And it's very satisfying. Like there's story beats in both that are the same, and in both the original and this one and the remake, they're like real satisfying. Like I love when the fucking dog attacks anybody in either version. Like I love when Beast is. So let me ask you this: I haven't seen the remake in a long time. It's Beast in both of them, or is it Beauty in the remake? That's
no Beauty. Beauty gets killed in both movies.
Okay. That's what I thought. Okay, so then every time that Beast like attacks one of the cannibals, I love it in both movies.
Yeah. What's weird is Michael Berryman is actually, so Wes Craven made a sequel, which I never saw. And apparently Michael Berryman is in that movie too, even though it's very clear that like, at least to me, it was clear the dog killed him and like ripped his throat out.
Right.
And you see that in much more graphic fashion in the remake with a different character.
Right.
Yeah. In the sequel, in the remake rather, like I said, Michael Bailey Smith is a gigantic stuntman. Fun fact, he actually played Super Freddy in A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, Dream Child.
Oh my God. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I mean, the crazy stuff that happens to the mutants, right? Because here's one, or the cannibals. There's one thing that's different in the original that is not in the remake, and that the scene in the end with Ruby and the baby, and then I guess it's the same mutant that's going after her, right? At the end.
In the 77 movie, it's Mars, played by Lance Gordon. In the remake, it's Lizard. But they're Mars. The same. They're the same character.
Right.
It's the one that eats the bird and rapes the girl in the cabin.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Lizard is the one that has like the cleft palate thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the remake, it's like he's going after the baby, he's going to kill the baby, and then Jupiter and him basically go over a cliff and die. That's the way that they end in that one in the remake. In this one, it's like much more involved. Like Jupiter gets a fucking snake and has him bite him, and
Oh
I was
no,
like,
Ruby.
oh, I'm sorry, I'm fucking up.
Yeah.
You
I
get
know
me.
what you mean.
Most of them have planet names, but then
Yeah.
yeah. But I was like, how did they film that? Where she's like going to grab the snake. They film her grabbing the snake, and then it's probably like a snake prop that bites him or whatever. And then Doug just stabs him to death.
Oh.
I felt like that was a lot more satisfying than like the way he died in the remake. What did you think?
I like there's something really powerful about the ending of the original.
The 77.
Where just Martin Spear, the character who plays the actor who plays Doug, just like stabbing down into the camera with this like crazed look in his eye, having saved his baby, his wife, his in-laws dead, and just stabbing into the camera, and that's it. And it's like the movie just ends. It's like nothing. It's just like they fade to red.
Yes.
It's like a crazy, like abrupt ending.
Yeah.
And there's something incredibly powerful about that. Yeah, I do like the ending of the original, I think, a little bit better. Whereas I like the Doug story better in the remake.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think this is a movie that, we talked about Michael Berryman and how it launches his 50-year plus career. This is a movie that kind of gets forgotten about in the horror pantheon of Dee Wallace.
Yes.
This is her first horror movie. And, just 4 years later, she's in The Howling. A year after that, she becomes America's Mom in E.T. But then between her now as like a genre actress and America's Mom, she then goes on to basically be America's Mom in the next decade of horror movies. She's in Critters. She's in Cujo, of course. She's in just a litany of horror films and genre films throughout the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
One of my favorite films ever is Peter Jackson's The Frighteners, 1996, where she's absolutely insane and awesome in that movie. But yeah, I feel like it's interesting. So she dies in this movie relatively early on.
Right.
And then about 6 or 7 years later, she would be in Cujo, where, she has to protect the child from a savage beast.
Monster, yeah.
And, I kind of feel like they almost could have gender swapped the character to make her into, or that character, the mom, into the cannibal killing, character.
Oh.
Yeah. I feel like Cujo might be like an alternate universe of what happens with this mother, where the baby grows up to be the kid in the back of the friggin', what is it, a Ford Pinto or whatever?
Right.
In Cujo. But
yeah.
Boy, Dee Wallace in this movie, it's hard to imagine her like being, and with absolutely no disrespect, I've met her. She is phenomenal. She's one of the nicest people. But it is hard as somebody born in 82, which we were, the year E.T. came out. It's hard to picture her as this like sexy young woman.
Yes.
And she's beautiful in this movie at the beginning of the original. And it's like just a couple years, 5 years later, she's the mom in E.T. And she just, kind of becomes known as that everybody's mom character,
Yes. I mean, that's kind of what's interesting about this movie, right? Is that there is like no mercy for anyone in it. They just kill her, and it's very sudden and abrupt. You know, when you watch the movie, you don't know what's going on. You don't necessarily think that she's going to get taken out, and she does. You know, in both versions, it's kind of like, oh my god, oh, okay, they killed her. Like, you know, they killed the mother, the grandmother, and then the father. You're like, okay, the grandfather's definitely going to die because he's an asshole, right? But her dying, it's very like abrupt and sudden, and just so sad, man. In this one,
Yeah.
yeah, it's funny. Like, I think that in the remake, I kind of feel almost like the family kind of deserves it a little bit more. In this one, the family just seems more normal, with the exception of the father, who drops like the N bomb at one point, and
Yeah.
like,
He's
the,
like, oh yeah, I used to be a cop in Cleveland, and I was always taking care of those. And you're like,
yeah.
oh,
Yeah, like I said, like I'm not used to hearing that word, like unless it's like, you know, a biopic about slavery or, you know, segregation, or like a Tarantino movie. And then all of a sudden, like, oh shit, that, you know, and he says hillbillies too. But I think that Craven, you know, obviously who created all these characters and stuff, he was trying to say something about cops. And he even says a line in this one, which I don't think he says in the remake. Maybe he did. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But he says a line of like, oh, I didn't get killed working the beat or doing this for 25 years, but I almost got killed by my wife. Does he say that in the remake too?
oh yeah. Well, in the remake, he talks about um how no, I don't think he says something to that. I, my brain is a little frazzled from watching both movies back to back, so like trying to remember bit pieces
Exact
of
dialogue.
dialogue, I'm like
Yeah.
losing a little bit.
Right. But in the remake, it's more like, okay, you got this conservative, gun loving father in law, and then the son who's like this
Yeah.
liberal Democrat.
And I also think it's funny how in the remake, keeping in mind the movie it came out in 06, which means it was probably filmed in 05. And they're talking about like the son, or the son-in-law, Doug, Aaron Stanford's character. He works for a cell phone company. And I'm like trying to think back, like I didn't have an iPhone. I didn't get a smartphone until Charlotte was born. So I didn't get together with Athena until 2008, and then Charlotte was born at the end of 2010. So
Okay.
I didn't get a smartphone probably until mid 2011. So we're talking 5 years before that. I was probably still driving around with like a flip phone,
Sure.
or, you know, like a pull the antenna up kind of phone, where like, you remember when you had to send a text message and you would have to hit the number, like if you wanted to use the letter C, you would have to hit the number 2 3 times.
I think I kind of remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
So like a cell phone guy in 2005, 2006, when like cell phones were just starting to take off, that was probably a statement even more about like, oh, you're one of these new up and coming, you know, millennials who thinks that technology is great, and you know, selling me your flippity phone. And
Right. Right. Well, it's funny. I don't even know if the term millennial would have even been around at that point. Right.
Good point. Yeah.
I mean, he's probably still considered Gen X or whatever. But no, I know what you're saying. Like, there's all this commentary in that one. I think in the Craven version, it's more of like a commentary of like, you know, you live in the city and he's a cop and he's working in the city. In the remake, is the guy a cop from the city? Bob?
I think so. I think that was the whole point. And they were, yeah.
Okay. So I think they focus kind of more on the idea of like, okay, he's a cop from the city, and so he's not used to this situation, like this craziness that's in the middle of nowhere, right? And it's funny too. One other big difference is in the remake, there's the scene where they talk to the guy at the gas station, and the guy at the gas station just blows his fucking head off. It's just bits. He shoots himself with a shotgun. In this one, Big Bob finds him and he's trying to hang himself, and then like Papa Jupiter just jumps through the fucking window and grabs him and just beats him, right?
Yeah.
In this version.
No, in the original, yeah, it's a great jump scare moment, like legit jump scare moment through a window.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're both. I think the dirtiness and the grittiness of the original makes it like a obviously a darker, more memorable film experience, but
Yeah.
I think it's much easier to watch and enjoy the 2006 movie, especially for like the gore and the crazy editing that's used. I also think it's funny we haven't mentioned, but like the two of the main characters in the remake are played by like Aaron Stanford, who was Pyro in the X-Men movies, and he made this in between X-Men 2 and the far superior X-Men The Last Stand.
Shut the
That was a
fuck up.
joke. That was a
Yeah,
joke.
yeah, yeah,
I was
yeah.
trying somewhere. Brian just woke up angry. That was
Yes,
a
he
joke.
did.
Um, I will say I don't hate The Last Stand as much as a lot of other people do, but but it's X-Men 2 is fucking amazing. And Emily the Raven, who was like probably in the middle of season 2 of Lost, maybe like because Lost came out in 04 and she was on it from the very beginning. So she was like a breaking out as like
Yeah.
this, monster television star. She was one of the main characters of that show.
Yeah.
And for her to go from that to like, raped by cannibal mutants in a, it's not a very favorable role. Neither of these movies do like women characters any like justice. They're either like killed off, they're either like they're protective, they fight back, but they are like pretty much beaten down and abused. Like and it's like, I feel like if there was a remake, if there would be an updated version of this, in 2026, 20 years after, then we might get that version I spoke about where the husband gets killed. And did you ever see the French movie Revenge? It's on Shudder. It's a rape revenge movie.
I have not. I know what you're talking about, though. I have not.
Because that kind of feels like it's in this universe. It's just separate, obviously take the cannibals out of it and just replace it with like French dude bros. And it's very similar.
Okay.
In the idea of this like desert wilderness, rape revenge story, brutally violent. It's that's what I think a remake of this would look like today.
Okay.
More in that spirit.
I kind of want to check that out. I know that that's really good. I know that like for Shudder, their main image when you like log into their website, it's like the fucking teeth creature from Channel Zero, Nicolas Cage from Mandy, and then the girl from Revenge.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
It's an awesome movie. Fucking
nice.
Great movie.
I was going to ask you, and this could be kind of like towards the end of our little Hills Have Eyes discussion. You said that you did not see the sequel to the original. Did you see the sequel to the remake?
I did, and I did not like it at all. I thought it was terrible.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen it, so
it's one of those things where it didn't even feel like a movie. It just kind of felt like a bunch of like violent scenes. Mm-hmm. Like this movie, there are a large number of characters that in the first 15 minutes of the movie you care about in both versions. You care about this family, whether the dad's an asshole, whether, you agree politically with their agendas, you care about this family and you want them to be safe. And the sequel to the remake didn't have any of that. It just was like, it was almost like a movie that focused too much on the cannibals for like 90 minutes. But I never saw Craven's Hills Have Eyes 2. But I've also not heard very good things about it. And it wasn't long after that where he made the original Nightmare on Elm Street. And that was the movie that kind of catapulted him away from like the low budget, gritty filmmaking.
Right.
Like almost guerrilla filmmaking and into like, okay, we're going to give you a budget. We're going to give you special effects. We're going to, we like your creative vision now. And, and then all of a sudden he becomes Wes Craven,
Yeah.
it's almost, if Nightmare on Elm Street was not the success that it was, I feel like movies like Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes might kind of have been forgotten. And, you know, both of those movies have gotten remakes, updates, sequels. And, you know, why would somebody in the early 2000s go and remake this like brutal horror film from 1975 or 1977? Well, it's because Wes Craven made them.
Right.
So,
Right.
so like, if Freddy doesn't take off and Nightmare on Elm Street doesn't take off, you know, who knows if, you know, these movies, we'd be talking about these movies today.
Wow. Dude, that was a really good way to kind of bring Wes Craven month to a close right there, you know, just sort of saying like, okay, so this is what happened with his career. We didn't get around to covering Music of the Heart, but maybe we'll do a Wes Craven month next year. And maybe we'll do Hills Have Eyes Part 2 next year anyway, regardless of what people have said.
I still think we need to do our like month of horror filmmakers making like romantic comedies and dramas. So we can do Music of the Heart. We can do For the Love of the Game by Sam Raimi with Kevin Costner. There's.
Can we do Starman? Would that work too?
Oh, John Carpenter. We could do Starman. Yeah, that's great. Who else?
I mean, I actually kind of would do that just for shits and giggles. I don't know how much I would enjoy Music of the Heart, but you know, I did play the violin at one point in my life. So
there you go.
There you go.
Right before we came on, I think we're done with Hills Have Eyes. Right before we came on, I noticed on Facebook that Alan Arkin passed away.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah. So I want to do a short review sometime this week of Wait Until Dark. Alan Arkin plays a thief trying to capture a jar, not a statue that has heroin in it from a blind woman played by Audrey Hepburn in the late 60s. One of the, not a horror movie, but one of the scariest thrillers you'll ever see. One notorious scene that he's in always makes it onto the scariest movie moments lists. There was, we covered it on 101 Scariest Horror Movie Moments, but what an actor Alan Arkin was. He was Yossarian in Catch-22. He won an Oscar for Little Miss Sunshine. One of my favorite roles, he plays the very, very nice, attempting to be angry police chief in So I Married an Axe Murderer.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he was incredibly versatile, and it was sad to see that he had passed away right as I was like about to click record. So
oh wow. Okay. So it's real recent. Okay. Yeah, it's a shame. He's pretty awesome. I haven't seen that movie, but I do remember covering it on the 101 Scariest Horror Movie Moments. And yeah, he's just awesome. Real funny guy in a lot of the movies he's into.
Yeah.
So, yeah, cool, man. So yeah, Danny is talking about putting a review like that out. Danny puts out reviews like multiple times a week. Once a week, he and I get together. Actually, this week we got together twice a week. We did this movie called Unwelcome, which is on Shudder right now, featuring a bunch of red caps. I don't think that we spoke of that movie as highly as we talked about The Hills Have Eyes, but you still should check out our review. Danny's got a whole bunch of shorts, though, on the channel. You want to tell everybody what we're thinking about doing next after we have ended Wes Craven month?
Yeah. So later this year, David Gordon Green has a new Exorcist film coming out. It's part of a trilogy, I believe. So he has the first of what will likely be 3 new Exorcist films. So we thought, let's talk about The Exorcist. We have a review up on the channel from a Christmas time, maybe a year or two ago, where we covered The Exorcist in long form.
Right.
But we'll talk about Exorcist 3, definitely. And we are also going to get into the Fox show, The Exorcist. Yes. Which I remember watching season 1 and really enjoying it. Chris raves about it all the time. That season 2 was even better. So we're going to check that out and talk about the Fox series, The Exorcist, and talk about some of the Exorcist films that we haven't talked about. Not Exorcist 2, though. And, we'll, talk about a little bit about David Gordon Green's upcoming trilogy. It's got to be better than the Halloween one, right?
Oh, still shots fired. Okay, we'll see. Yeah. I'm actually really looking forward to that TV show. And believe it or not, I have not watched The Exorcist 3 from beginning to end. So
it's a good one.
That's what I've heard.
There is an argument. There is an argument to be had. I'm not saying I'm going to make it, but there is an argument to be had that it's the best Exorcist movie.
Oh man.
I'm not going to make that argument.
Danny's not going to make that argument, guys. This is the guy that messaged us and said that the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy is better than the original Star Wars trilogy. So
I don't think there's anything wrong with that statement.
You guys can find him on Twitter at Dr. ZayasGOD. But anyway, we got more stuff to cover on the Lastercast, so make sure that you guys are subscribed. Thank you so much for watching. Let us know which one you prefer, The Hills Have Eyes, the original, or the remake.